Let me ask you this. When was the last time you looked at your marketing and asked, is this actually working?
Not just how it looks, not just how much activity is happening, but whether it's bringing in the right leads, creating real opportunities, and helping you grow.
Because here's the truth. A lot of businesses have marketing in motion, but no way of knowing what's working and what's not. There's no feedback loop. It's just activity without clarity.
So, in this final episode of the Guide Marketing Framework, we're showing you how to evaluate your marketing like a CEO and make confident decisions based on data, not guesswork.
Hey there, I'm Steve Phipps.
And I'm AnnieLaurie Walters. You're listening to the Growth Minded Marketing Podcast, where we give practical guidance to help you lead your marketing, grow your team, and scale your company with confidence.
This is the final episode in our Guide Marketing Framework series. Today, we're digging into the letter E, which is evaluate and adjust. This is the step that turns your strategy into an ongoing system, one that grows and scales with your company.
And if you're just joining us and you're wondering, what is this Guide Marketing Framework you speak of? Well, it's our 5-part system for building a marketing strategy that actually works. And it covers everything from generating your strategy and story, upgrading your online presence, informing your buyers with content, developing and executing a sales plan, and evaluating all the things that you're doing to make sure that it's actually working and moving people to an action.
If you've missed any of the earlier episodes, I would encourage you to go back and check those out. Each one walks through a critical step with practical takeaways that you can use immediately.
Yes, we'll drop links straight to those podcasts in the show notes. But for today's episode, it's the one that's going to hold it all together. This is the glue episode. Evaluate and adjust is what keeps your strategy relevant, responsive, and results driven. But before we get into the details, let's be honest. Most teams don't evaluate their marketing. They execute, they move on, they hope for the best, but hope is not a strategy.
No, it isn't. And the problem is that often when a CEO or leadership is checking in on marketing, it's surface level. Maybe there are a few graphs, a few numbers about how many likes were generated. Maybe there was a spike in your website traffic, but there's nothing there that's actually telling you what's driving growth.
And if that's where you're putting your hope, it's a false hope because those numbers aren't always telling you the full story. And the result is you keep spending, you keep guessing, you keep wondering why marketing feels so unpredictable. But it's not a mystery, it's a missing feedback loop.
Exactly. You can't improve what you're not measuring, and you can't measure what you're not tracking intentionally.
So let's dig in. What should you track? How do you make sense of it? And most importantly, how do you turn data into action?
All right. So, step number one, tracking what matters. Let's start with something foundational. If you want your marketing to work, you have to track what actually matters. Now, a lot of businesses, a lot of marketers, they're tracking something, but not necessarily the right things. It could be vanity metrics like social media likes or impressions that feel good and they might look great on a presentation, but it's not helping you make strategic decisions.
We're talking about metrics that tie directly to business outcomes: traffic by source, conversion rates, lead quality, sales qualified leads, close rates. That's where you get insight, not just information. So here's a question, Steve. For the CEO who feels overwhelmed by data, what's the simplest way to get started with tracking meaningful KPIs?
Start small. Instead of trying to build out 20 different dashboards, focus on a handful of metrics that actually move the needle. And let me also say that this is where it's important to have the tools that capture the data that you need. So, I mentioned this in a previous episode. In fact, the last episode, a tool like HubSpot is a good tool that can give you data for the entire buyer's journey. And so if you pair that with something like Google Analytics, then you start getting a lot of really robust information. So that way you can start looking at things like website traffic and the channels where they're coming from. So organic, paid, social media. And again, if you think about this in terms of the funnel, your sales funnel, top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. You're just following through the sales process. And so how are people getting to you? What are the sources? Then from those sources, how many leads were generated? However you're defining a lead. You could also consider how many appointments were scheduled. From there, how many of those leads ultimately become customers? Again, this goes back to the previous episode, but this is why it's important to have a sales process defined, because then you can look at the metrics at each stage by source. And then it's also looking at what are your conversion rates? What percentage of people move from being a website visitor to being a lead, to being a sales qualified lead, to becoming a customer? Again, your terms, your labels certainly may vary, but you get the idea. And then it's looking at each of those from the standpoint of what was the customer acquisition cost, or what's the ROI? And let me also preface, depending on what tools you have capturing this data, it's going to take time to build this out. A recent coaching client, part of the conversation with the CEO was how to build out a reporting dashboard that he could look at that had these types of metrics so that he could make informed decisions about where to invest in marketing, what not to invest in. And as he was digging in, as we were walking through this, what came to the surface was before he could get meaningful metrics, he had to work with his sales team to make sure that they were inputting their information and updating what was happening in the sales process so that the metrics he was receiving were accurate and timely. So again, it's one of those things. This could be a long-term type of process to get the data that you need if the inputs aren't already there. But pick 3 to 5 KPIs, key performance indicators, look at them monthly. As you start to get this data over the course of time, that's where you can start digging in. What's improving? What's lagging? What does this tell us about our efforts? Are we seeing some things working and not others? It's using the numbers to inform decisions. It's not numbers for the sake of numbers, but it's so that you have increased visibility into what's working and what's not.
Let's stay on this idea of what we are tracking, because one of the most common traps we see is this. We need more traffic. And sure, that's part of the equation, but more traffic doesn't automatically mean more leads or more sales. What you need is better traffic, qualified traffic.
Exactly. I mean, you could double your traffic overnight and still not get any new business if it's the wrong people. I'm thinking about some past companies that I've encountered where when we started working with them, they had a ton of traffic, but it was never traffic that was going to convert into buyers. They had created articles that people were interested in, but it wasn't content that their buyers were searching for. It was somebody further in a different capacity within those companies searching for a different problem. As you said, having traffic for the sake of traffic doesn't necessarily matter. It's getting the right visitors who are decision makers and who align with your target audience.
Yeah, and just as an aside, if you're getting traffic just for traffic's sake, maybe you're writing articles about local things just as a local SEO play, you can actually do harm to your SEO, because if you're just getting a ton of traffic from random sources, it's going to confuse the algorithms about what your site's really about. And then it's going to start to penalize you for the things that you actually want to be ranking for. So we've seen some people take that approach of just let's write whatever we can to get traffic to the website. But those numbers are truly empty numbers, and it can hurt you in the long run. It's really not a great idea.
Well, and to your point, AnnieLaurie, and this is where I would encourage you, if you haven't listened to 2 episodes ago where we talk about inform with content, go back to that episode, because the goal is create content that builds trust with your buyers by answering their questions. If you're creating content that maybe is driving in traffic, to AnnieLaurie's point, but it doesn't align with what your buyers are actually looking for, if it doesn't align with your expertise, then yes, you could see an increase in website traffic. However, you're not bringing in more buyers. You're just bringing in people that are going to read an article and leave, and they're never going to buy from you. So it's that idea of a vanity metric. It looks good, but it's not going to improve your ROI.
Exactly. And this may or may not be the best time to make this point, but we had a client once who had written a blog post and made a joke about Santa Claus. And the amount of search traffic that website was getting about Santa Claus was off the charts, but none of that traffic was converting business for them, and especially this was like a client that provided local services and people were landing on their website because of the Santa thing. And I think about how like when you go to your metrics and you see what are the keywords this site is ranking for, and it's something random like that's not helping you. That's not increasing your opportunity to get qualified leads and close deals.
So even here, an article that I wrote on our blog years ago, we've removed it.
Years ago,
I mean,
yes.
this is probably 6 or 7 years ago, but the article was to the effect of why your marketing sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher. And I remember looking back at the analytics and seeing we were ranking for things related to Charlie Brown's teacher. Well, that has nothing to do. And so initially when I did that, however many years ago, when our team was a lot smaller and AnnieLaurie was not here to help me with our content strategy as she is today, it sounded like a clever idea and I thought it was a good article, but here again, it was ranking for things that we weren't intending. So it's not that it's not going to happen, but the idea here, you get great content that's targeted in on your audience, and then the numbers become more meaningful when you consider the context and the quality of who is actually coming to your website.
Yes, it's also very relevant to what we're talking about, tracking the right things. And so if you're CEO and your marketing person comes to you and says, look, we're getting this much traffic to the website. If you're not tracking the right things, then you might not realize that a quarter of that traffic is about Santa Claus. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. And that's where having other metrics. So it's looking at one metric in relationship to another. So the follow-up then is great. How many of those visitors are converting into leads?
Yes.
And
yes.
then if you see that number is minuscule and it's not increasing, then that's a good indicator that maybe you have content driving traffic, but it may not be the right content.
And that's what, sometimes people, you fall into the trap. It's unintentional, but it's not hard to fall into this vanity metric mentality where you're chasing page views and likes and impressions, things like that. And it looks good. That's why they call it vanity metrics. Like it gives you the dopamine hit. You think, okay, we're getting traffic. Something must be getting some traction, but it doesn't always mean that you're getting traction. It doesn't mean anything if it's not tied to action. So the real question isn't just, are we getting visits? Are we getting traffic? It's, are we attracting people who actually fit our ideal client profile? Are they engaging with our content? Are they sticking around to read a second article, a third article? Do we even know how to track that? Are they taking any action when they land on our website? These are the things that we really need to know to be effective. So Steve, for a CEO who's used to watching website traffic but hasn't really thought much about the quality or anything beyond that, where should they start?
Well, the first place may be to go back to our last episode and listen to where we talk about the sales process, because the answer is you want to measure the next step that you want people to take in the sales process, in the buyer's journey. Website visitor, what do you want them to do next? Do you want them to schedule a call or book a demo, download a resource, fill out an assessment? That's the next step. Capture that initial metric, let's say website visitors, number of visitors. Then you want to look at how many of those actually converted into leads. So we're actually looking at 3 metrics here, but you got to have 2 up to get the third, and that's number of website visitors, number of leads, and then your conversion rate. So the percentage of leads that were generated by that traffic. And start there, start benchmarking it, start looking at that. What's your trend? Looking at that data immediately may or may not tell you something, but when you start looking at it over the course of time and you can start to see some trends, then you can start to establish some benchmarks and get a sense of direction. So that's where I would say start. Again, it's all about moving people through the sales process, ultimately so that they become customers. So let's measure the steps in that process. And if you haven't defined that sales process, even at a high level, then you don't know what to measure until you do.
Steve, tell us about the difference between a marketing qualified lead and a sales qualified lead.
I'm going to keep this high level because these are terms, again, if you're using a CRM like HubSpot, these terms float around. So if you're a smaller company, you have a couple of salespeople, this is really not going to be something that you need to spend a lot of time trying to figure out and define. This really becomes applicable bigger companies, enterprise level companies where you're doing lead scoring. That makes sense because of the work that goes into that. High level, just so you have familiarity with the terms, effectively a marketing qualified lead is someone who they filled out a form, they downloaded a guide, and from a marketing perspective, based on their activity, based on what you may know about them, about information that's available to you about who they are, the company they work for, you can look at them and say, yes, we think they're qualified because of what they've done and what we know about them. Doesn't mean they're ready to buy. A sales qualified lead tends to be that MQL who has moved along. Maybe they've scheduled an appointment, they've booked a demo, they've taken a step that is expressing intent to buy, or at least an interest in buying. And so that's where, if you are looking at it in that detail, when you have your sales process, you have your metrics, you can look and see what those conversion points are. And that can help give you more insight as to where your best SQLs are coming from, who's converting, et cetera. But again, for a lot of companies, yes, know the terms, but I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to define that. Have a basic sales process that you can track in your CRM, know what those basic conversion rates are from one step to the next.
Well, that's a great transition into our next step in this process, and that's using a CRM and using it well. So let's dive into tools, specifically your CRM, because if you don't have one, or you're not actually using it well, or you don't know how to use it, or you've paid for it and it's sitting there and you're not taking advantage of all the features, your data is fragmented, your follow-up is inconsistent, and your marketing insights are just going to be guesswork all over the place. That's not helping anybody.
Exactly. And it's interesting because I've had conversations with two different clients this week, fairly new clients, about their CRMs. And one is transitioning from what they've been using to HubSpot. The other, they don't have a CRM. It's been more just internal management, spreadsheets, and keeping up with things in Outlook. And so if you don't have familiarity with a CRM, it's customer relationship management. And it's not just a glorified digital Rolodex. CRMs, and again, I'm going to reference HubSpot. That is my favorite CRM. I know that there are a gazillion different options, but HubSpot is the one that we prefer. But what it does, or at least again, from the perspective of HubSpot, is it gives you visibility across the entire buyer journey. It tracks what's happening on your website. It then, as long as it's being updated, helps you see where people are in your sales pipeline. So again, there's various stages that are mapped out, and it gives you reporting so you can see where your leads are coming from, how long they're in each stage. You can look and see what content they're engaging with, how much time have they spent on your website, and you can see where your deals are getting stuck.
This is great. And if you're already using a CRM, but you're just logging activity and you're not really leveraging it to review the data, pull out insights to shape your next decisions, your next moves, you're definitely leaving a lot of value on the table. And recently, Steve, you walked me through how you're using HubSpot in our business, and that was really eye-opening and helpful for me. So if we have somebody listening who's kind of feeling like they don't really know if they're using it well, they're not sure, maybe just paint a picture for how you use it, or give some tips on how to start using it well. What are some baseline things that people should be doing with their CRM to make sure that they're getting the most value out of it and that it's actually helping them move the needle?
So a couple of thoughts here. Number one is get something set. Now, again, there's context here because the adoption and the use of a CRM, how quickly that gets up and running, how easily or willingly people are to use it, especially salespeople, affects how long it's going to take to get this up and running and to be that record of truth, that single record of truth that you're looking for, so that you get insight into what's happening through the entire process, the entire buyer's journey. So for the folks that are maybe a one-person shop, or maybe you're a smaller team, get started with HubSpot Starter. They have an option that is $15 a month per user. If you do a year-long contract, it's $20 a month if you go month to month, but it gives you their sales module, it gives you their marketing module, gives you other things. It's a full suite of tools. Get it set up, put the tracking code on your website so you can start collecting data. Start there. Number two, get your sales pipeline set up. and start entering your prospects, your sales, your leads into the pipeline. Now you can set up forms, use the forms from HubSpot on your website. So if somebody completes a form, they request an appointment, you're using like Calendly, you can sync it to where it's putting those leads into HubSpot, create deals. There's automation that can be done. Again, it gets a little bit into the weeds, but start capturing your information there. So again, if you're a small team, this is going to be easier for you. If you have a bigger team, then there's a process of training. There's going to be the process if they're not using any kind of a CRM right now. There's going to be conversation around why it's important. And again, it's more than we have time for in this conversation, but it's getting it there. And again, bare minimum, start getting your website information collected so that you can start at least seeing your website activity. And then as you start adding in your pipeline, your deals, you're going to start getting more information. And now I'd say from there, set up a basic marketing dashboard so that you can see what some of these metrics look like. Again, guys, this is not an overnight thing. Depending on where you are, could be some cultural shifts here to get people on board. But sign up for an account. There's a free version. If you just want to get in and kick the tires, it can feel overwhelming. It's one of the conversations I mentioned, 2 people that I'm having conversations with this week. And one of those is working with them, with the CEO, to get this set up so that they can start tracking their leads.
Right. And if you have a CRM and you're not using it to get these kinds of answers, or you don't have a process in place for reviewing that information, it's not really helping you lead. You don't need to use every feature, obviously, but it would be super helpful for you to have it as a decision-making tool and not just a tracking tool.
And AnnieLaurie, something that you just mentioned that keeps CEOs, marketing teams, sales teams from implementing a CRM. One of the things is the complexity or the perceived complexity. So that's where it can make sense to hire somebody who can help you onboard or can coach you through it. So that way it's taking some of the intimidation away because you've got somebody that can help you get that set up.
Absolutely. That's really helpful. So let's talk about testing and optimizing. It's all about experimenting and seeing what's actually working, because evaluate and adjust isn't just about reviewing what's already happened. It's also about being proactive. Learning how to improve what happens next is very important as well.
Right. I'm not the first person to say this, but marketing is part art and it's part science. So that's where testing comes in. And so if you're not familiar with the terminology, we talk about an A/B test. You create version A of something like an email subject line, and you create version B, or you could create 3 versions of that. And then using some of the different tools that have that capability included, you send out an email with 3 different subject lines, and it would send it out to 20% of your list. So if you had, say, a list of 1,000 people, it would divide up those 3 subject lines to 20% of the list. So between 200 people, and then whichever one of those subject lines gets the most opens, that's the version that would go to the remaining 800 people of the list. That type of testing can be done with different calls to act. It's a calls to action on a website, testing the colors, the language around it, landing page headline. Some of these small changes, and especially in combination, can lead to bigger insight. There are some tools that will let you do what's called multivariate testing or multivariable testing. And that's where it's not just testing one thing, but it's testing a couple of things in combination and some different variations of that. But again, this doesn't have to be complicated or technical. You can just test 2 different subject lines and see which gets the best result.
Yeah, and this is a warning to anyone out there who's like me and tends to hyper focus on a thing. Don't test it to death. Stay curious, try options and see what resonates, but don't get so fixated on testing that it keeps you from moving forward on the other aspects of your plan, right? I'll share something. I did a bit of unintentional testing, but we recently wrote a blog post. Well, let's say recently, it was almost a year ago. We wrote a blog post, and it was one of those blog posts where the content was really great, but there wasn't a real obvious keyword to optimize the content for. And as a keyword research person, as a SEO strategist, I'm always looking to make sure that we have great content but also that it's optimized for the right keywords that people are searching. And so I just made a choice and I went with it, and I wasn't super sure if it was going to be a good one. And I've been watching that blog post for about a year, and I noticed that it's just not getting traction. And the type of traffic it's getting is not the kind I want. And so I just revisited it yesterday, and I actually used ChatGPT, and I gave ChatGPT the content and I said, just evaluate this post and tell me what you think it's about. And tell me if it makes sense to optimize it for this keyword. Is there a better keyword to recommend? And just using ChatGPT to help me evaluate that one piece of content and the keyword that it had been optimized for, I got great insight. And I just recently I pushed those changes live last night. So while this was not maybe an intentional example of A/B testing, it's still paying attention and going back and checking on the things that you've watched. Like I said, that's a post I put out there a year ago. When I put it out there, I wasn't sure it was the right one, but I have been watching it carefully and used ChatGPT to help me make adjustments. So stay tuned. I'll have to report back and let you know if we start getting better traffic.
So that's a really good example. And I think it's worth noting here when we think about expectations of marketing, whether it's the sales team's expectation, the marketing managers, or the CEOs, there's a big part of marketing that's just squishy because we don't always know what's going to work. We can run the analysis, we can run the game scenarios and all those things. But at the end of the day, we're trying to anticipate human behavior. And so sometimes the things that we think are going to just crush it suck and don't do anything. And sometimes the idea that was the last minute idea that just sort of gets tossed in there, we think, well, it's just worth a shot, that ends up taking off. So if you're the marketing manager, you already know this because you're in the trenches. There's some things that work really well and there's some things that don't. If you're the CEO, give grace. Now, you want to see upward movement up and to the right over the course of time, obviously with the results that you're getting. So you're getting a positive ROI, but also recognize not every campaign is going to be a home run. Now, I have to remind myself of this because I'm a CEO of my company. And so I can get impatient with things. I forget sometimes that it takes time. There are some things that I think, man, this is going to be really great. And I put it out there or my team puts it out there and it's crickets. And other times it just takes off. So again, this is where this idea of testing can help us get clarity and get feedback so that we can figure out what is working, what's not. We're not just relying on our gut feel, but we get metrics that we can use to guide those decisions, both at a macro and a micro level.
Thanks. See, that's so great. And thinking of those listening who aren't testing at all, what's a simple place for them to get started?
I'm going to go back to the email and tools like HubSpot, MailChimp. Again, there are hundreds of email marketing tools that are out there that have A/B testing built in. So if you're doing any level of email marketing, test the subject line. If you're sending out a monthly newsletter, a weekly newsletter, I would encourage you to pick something other than newsletter as the subject line. That's boring. Pick something that gives somebody a reason to open it.
Easy for me to say, but yeah, that's a great time to ask ChatGPT to give you an idea on how to avoid boring subject lines.
Exactly. Put yourself in the perspective of your buyer. What would be interesting in the context of what you do, not just some random stuff, but something that they would actually be interested in, something to be helpful to them in the context of the problems that you solve. And so start there and go from there.
And the key isn't just running the test once, it's capturing the insight, what worked, what didn't, and then doing something. Make decisions based on this data that you're collecting. And that's going to be the gold that helps you make smarter decisions as you continue to move forward with your marketing.
100%. Because those insights don't just improve one email or landing page. If you're listening, if you're learning, if you're paying attention, then that can help shape your messaging, your offers, future campaigns. It can even help inform your sales conversations. And this is where testing becomes a part of the strategy.
Let's zoom out for a second. We've been kind of down in the details. Zooming out, evaluation isn't just about numbers. It's about building a rhythm of reflection and refinement into your strategy. Steve, talk to us about that rhythm. What do high-performing teams do consistently?
Yeah, this fifth step is quarterly review rhythms. It's building in time. 90 days is a really great time frame to not just look at metrics, but to ask what's working, what's not, what do we need to stop, what do we need to start, What do we need to adjust? Now, this whole idea of the 90-day rhythm, this is not unique to us by any means. If you're familiar with EOS, which is the Entrepreneurial Operating System, which is based on the book Traction by Gino Wickman, then this is where we're going to be looking at rocks. So your rocks are the quarterly priorities. And these tend to be the bigger initiatives that help move you forward more than just the day-to-day activities. And so it's in this quarterly meeting and this rhythm that gives you a chance to step back, see what's happening, what do you need to prioritize now for the next 90 days, and then make sure that you're realigning based on what the market and what the metrics are telling you. And this is more important now than maybe it's ever been because of the rapid pace of change that we're seeing in buyer behavior, driven significantly by AI, because it's changing how people are getting information, where they're getting information from, and it's having a lot of effects on website traffic. And so again, that's where having this rhythm becomes really important, because it gives you the flexibility to adjust your activities without waiting 12 months until you get your end of year results.
Yes, and that rhythm is not only keeping your strategy alive, it's also keeping your team on the same page and making sure that you're all moving forward little by little towards the same target. And it ensures that things don't get shoved to the back burner. That's one thing that I love about the rocks and EOS, is that it helps you to keep those big picture goals in focus and prioritize them. Because when all of the operational day-to-day details start to get in the way, it's easy to push those big picture goals backwards, but you're not going to move forward on them if you don't set aside this time and this rhythm, this 90-day process. It really is helpful. It helps you to make smarter, intentional adjustments to keep you moving forward.
And I want to put this into context. The assumption here, and the whole reason that we're going through this guide marketing framework, is that these 90-day planning sessions are in the context of having a bigger marketing plan, a strategy, or a framework that helps inform what your priorities, what your rocks are. So when I'm coaching a client, we start out with a scorecard. It's a 10-part scorecard based on this framework. And we use that to identify what are the critical areas that need to be addressed in the next 90 days. Because this can be overwhelming if you don't have some sort of a framework that you can use to guide your activities. As we've talked about in this episode, in previous episode, there are multiple pieces to building a comprehensive, holistic marketing strategy that is going to support companies that want to grow and scale for the long term. And so it's when you have clarity of a framework that you can use to identify where to get started, when to get started, and using this 90-day rhythm to identify a handful of meaningful shifts or rocks for each quarter. And when you do that in sequence over the course of time, again, this is not an overnight thing. We're not talking about a one-off campaign that's just going to drive more traffic. That's what you're looking for. Fantastic. You can run a Google Ads campaign with an ad agency, with a Google Ads agency. You could get some traffic. What we're talking about is building a system, a marketing system for your business, whether you're implementing it or somebody else is helping you, that's going to give you the tools and the framework so that you can grow and scale for the long term. And these 90-day planning sessions are a critical piece of that, because that's where you're, as you've already said, AnnieLaurie, you're coming back. It's not about reinventing, but it's about making these adjustments and these implementations that are going to move you forward. And so if you're not taking the time to do this, if you're not adjusting, if you're not looking at your metrics, then you're operating on yesterday's assumptions, which in today's AI-paced world, it might be last hour's assumption. And just, that's not a risk that you can afford.
Building systems takes time. Why should we make the time to build them?
I'm going to go back to something you said a little while ago. This is a Vince Lombardi quote, and that is, hope is not a strategy. For companies that are looking to grow and scale for the long term, not just the quick win. Yes, quick wins matter, but for companies that are looking to grow and scale for the long term, can you do that efficiently and effectively if you don't have some sort of a plan, if you don't have some sort of a framework? I love working with companies that are using EOS to run their companies, because in that scenario, the CEO, the owner understands the value of a framework. They understand the value of systems, the value of clarity, and those that are working with some sort of an implementer understand the value of having someone help them implement it rather than just trying to rely on themselves. Now, there's some companies that can do that, fantastic, but oftentimes it's much more efficient when they're working with an EOS implementer. So to that person, they might be like, well, do we really want to invest the time and resources into that? Maybe you don't. If you just need a quick win, great. Work with somebody that can set up an ad campaign. But if you're looking for something that's going to be a scalable system and framework that's adjustable, even as things in the marketplace change, as AI and technologies change, it's about building a system, especially because you go back to our last episode, this becomes an alignment of sales and marketing. This is building a revenue team. And this is making sure that you have everything that you need in place to build trust with your buyers for the long run so that you're the go-to, you're the thought leader, you're the expert in your field.
What I love about this is that it's sustainable, long-term results. This is evergreen, will stand the test of time, and it won't blow with whatever economic changes are battering down the house, because over the past 5 years, we've seen a lot of change, right? These systems and these processes are like building on a strong foundation. Wouldn't you agree?
100%. Because tools are going to change. Technology is going to change. What doesn't change is needing a clear plan, understanding your buyers, communicating clearly in a way that's going to build trust, helping them, your buyers, move forward in the process, and then tracking and evaluating the whole process. And those are fundamental. That doesn't change. Whatever AI is or isn't going to do in the future, we still have to do those things. It may be that the media changes. Again, the platforms change, but the principles remain.
Okay, Steve, let's talk to the CEO who's over here Googling what is EOS. Like maybe some of this is brand new to one of our listeners. Where do they start?
So with EOS, get a copy of the book, Traction by Gino Wickman. It's a really practical book. So if you're interested in something like that for your company that's looking at every part of your business, fantastic tool. We've had companies that they needed to get that stuff in order before we started working with them because there was just too much confusion. They weren't at a place where they could start growing and scaling their marketing to try to grow the business because they had too much other chaos in the business. Maybe your company is operating well, even if you haven't used a platform like EOS. That's great. If you're interested in getting more information about our marketing framework, you can go to wayfindmarketing.com. There's an assessment, which I think we're going to talk about in a minute. So there's resources there. If you are interested in talking to an EOS implementer or integrator, I forget the exact terminology, you can always reach out to us through the website, and I can always make those connections with somebody that implements and integrates EOS.
So this episode has been all about evaluate and adjust. Steve, how do we make that a consistent habit and not just something that's like a one item on the to-do list to check off?
You know, AnnieLaurie, what I would say is, again, start simple, but be intentional. So if it's just you and one other person, schedule a 90-day review. Look at whatever KPIs you have. Have you tested some things? And it may be that the first step is you may not have metrics to look at. So again, the starting point here may be sitting down and identifying what are our priorities for the next 90 days. And then decide from there, what is it that we're going to focus on? What do we have the energy, the resources? What aligns with our overall business goals? I mean, this is fundamental for what high-performing companies do. They're intentional, not waiting for perfection. And it's getting these rhythms into place. And I would say, if you've not listened to each episode for this guide framework, go back to the beginning. Every one of these episodes is filled with a lot of different ideas. And go to our website and take our guide marketing assessment and get access to our playbook, because it goes through, it gives practical tactical things that you can do. And it all aligns with what we've been talking about on the podcast. And so there's a lot of practical things that you can do to help you identify what is it that you need to get focused on.
Here's what we want you to do this week. Schedule a marketing review, even if it's just you in a notebook. Block the time. Sit down and ask, what are we tracking? What's actually working? Where are we wasting our efforts? Look at your KPIs, look at your traffic sources and anything that you've tested recently. This isn't just a task, it's a discipline.
And if you don't know where to start, you're not alone. This is where a lot of growth-minded CEOs get stuck. So a couple of things here. One, reach out. We can help you figure out what to measure, how to read the data, and to help you decide what your next move is. And this is how you lead marketing like a CEO, not a guesser. And the second thing that I would suggest is if you have some of this data, but again, you're not sure what to do with it, put it into ChatGPT. You put it into Copilot, whatever AI you're using, and ask it to help you make sense of it. So again, there's a couple of different ways that you can go with this, but you've got to get started.
That wraps up our walkthrough of the Guide Marketing Framework. We hope it's helped you see that marketing doesn't have to be a guessing game. It can be a clear strategic system that can help you lead, stop guessing, and start growing.
And as you've seen, each step of this framework is designed to give you structure and direction so that you can grow and scale your company with purpose without spinning your wheels.
If you missed any of the earlier episodes, check the show notes or just go back and find them in your podcast listening platform. Each one is packed with practical insight to help you take your next step forward.
In our next episode, we're going to switch things up. We're going to answer your questions. We're pulling together the most common questions around the Guide Marketing Framework. So everything that we've been talking about through these last few episodes, and we're going to dive in rapid fire style.
So if you have any questions at all, or if you've been wondering how to apply this to your business, this is going to be the episode you don't want to miss.
So don't sit on it. Go do something with it. And we will see you in the next episode.